Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by Ashley, who is here to share her recovery story. So I always love recovery stories. It's amazing hearing what worked, what didn't, what life is like now. And it's such a great thing, isn't it, to hear that people are recovering. So it's lovely to see you today, Ashley. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be on here. I've followed this podcast for quite a while, so it's really exciting to be on it.
Oh, it's so fun to have you here. And it's so cool to have people who have listened and who are now able to come and share their own journey. So I
Yeah.
love that so much. So can you just start out by saying a little bit about yourself and maybe what life was like before you became unwell? Because the story usually starts back in the past, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So, yeah, my life is quite different now to how it was before. So, I used to live in the city and I worked for a charity there, and my life was really quite busy. Um, I was always like, I'm sure a lot of people relate to this, overworking and overdoing. And I was basically just living a life that you would expect, giving my all to work and afterwards giving my all to life and to people and doing all of the things, and never really, I guess, taking time out for myself. So, yeah, that's kind of, I guess, how I see it now. At the time, that's not how I saw it because I didn't even really realize. But when I look back, that's kind of how I see myself, as sort of like in a whirlwind and always on the go.
Yeah, and like that's a really great image, and I can totally relate to that as
Hmm.
well. And life was just normal.
Yeah.
It was just what you did, and like you probably were around a whole load of other people that were living similar lives, who were also in this kind of whirlwind, maybe in a slightly different way.
Yes.
And it just seems normal, and you don't see it coming, do you?
That's so true. Yeah. Because I actually started to have some symptoms, not like the ones that I had when I got COVID, but I would have like migraines or gut issues, and I felt like I was always going to the doctor with something. And obviously, these were like slight sort of signs that something was wrong, maybe like my body trying to tell me something, but I didn't ever connect that to my life, which you don't because you're just living it and you just want to, you're kind of stuck in the cycle of keeping going, and you want to just keep doing all the things. But reflecting now, I can see that there were like early warning signs there that something wasn't quite right.
Yeah. And again, that's the sort of thing that the benefit of hindsight gives you, I suppose,
Yeah.
doesn't it? At the time it was, you know, probably more of an inconvenience than a sort of something that stopped your life from existing in the way that you wanted it to.
That's exactly it. Yeah. It felt like, how can I just get rid of this quickly so I can get back to being busy?
Yes. Ah, you're a fixer. You're just like me.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like I lived like such a full life, and I think I would have considered myself to be really happy. I guess it's only when you look back that you realize that it's almost, I guess, like you're masking, your way through life, like you're doing all the things you think you should and that should make you happy. So you're almost like, I was almost convincing myself that the way I was living was right for me because it was kind of the way that I'd always thought that I should live, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think it takes something dramatic to happen, and your perspective can change quite dramatically. But
Yeah,
as you say, at the time, it's what you do and it's what you want or what you feel like you want, or it just is, isn't it? You don't really
it
question
is.
it. Certainly, that was my experience. It just
Yeah,
is. It's just life. And
absolutely.
so, what kind of happened when you became unwell? Um, can you talk us through that kind of initial illness and then maybe how it progressed towards being longer term?
Yeah, so actually, what happened was that at the start of lockdown, for the first few weeks, I was actually really adapting to a quieter life. And I know obviously it was obviously so awful in so many ways, but there was this part of me that felt so relieved because I was working at home and I didn't have to actually do much or kind of all the things I've been doing before kind of fell away, and that felt really good initially. But then within even like a couple of weeks, I actually got COVID, and that's just when everything started to change dramatically. And after it, I wasn't, I would say, severe. It kind of started off like I just wasn't getting better. These symptoms that I had, they weren't I wasn't recovering in the way that you normally would expect to when you get a virus. But over time, rather than, I was trying to push, like I was trying to push to get better. And I'm sure a lot of us relate to that idea that, again, I just want to get rid of it so I can go back to my old life. And the more that I tried and the more that I pushed, the worse it got. And after a few months, I was like completely bedbound. I was unable to do anything. Like I couldn't walk more than a few meters, and my family had to help me with everything. I couldn't even really talk or even do anything for myself really. So it got to the point where it was like rock bottom, I guess. But that took months of trying to force myself out of it, and ultimately my poor body was like, just there for me, I guess, all along, saying like, this isn't the way out. And sadly, it just got worse and worse. And obviously, that was just a really awful thing when you don't know what's happening and you're trying so hard to get better, but you're not.
Yeah. And it sounds like your timeline is reasonably aligned with mine because I was March
Mm,
2020. So you were sort of quite a similar timeline. And like one of the things that I found at the time was, I mean, obviously it was a very unsettling time for everybody. And then,
yeah,
you get sick with the one thing that we're being told we have to avoid. So there's that extra
yeah,
level of, terror, I suppose. And then,
yeah,
the lack of any medical care because you're not sick enough. The threshold for hospitalization, for example, was so high.
yes,
And even for getting hold of a doctor on the phone, it was very, very difficult, certainly for me to do that. And
yeah,
any advice I was getting, well, was the wrong one, as it turned out, which was similar to you. I'll just push my way through this because that's what I've always done.
yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
long COVID didn't exist in name at this point. I mean, obviously, many people were coming down with it, but there was very little in terms of you know, discussion or knowledge about it. And one of the things for me that I found so terrifying was the isolation and the not knowing. And,
yeah,
it's like, what do I do? Like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. But because no one was
yeah,
able to tell me what to do, because I couldn't really get hold of anybody, I thought, well, I'll just revert to what I've always done and push through because, you just, um, So I don't know how your experience with that was, whether you were able to get any advice or any support, or were you feeling that similar level of like, I'm all on my own and I'm terrified? We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I relate to that. It was so scary because there was also an element, I don't know if this is the same for you, that my doctors didn't believe that it could really be possible because it was so new that, like you said, no one had COVID before, so it wasn't really known, I guess. And it's only later when I found like the CFS and ME, and of course people have been suffering with this for so many years. But when you go to your GP, it's just sort of like, oh, just you'll get better, just kind of you'll have to wait it out, get on with it. And you're saying, I'm actually getting worse, but there's not really anything that they say other than just wait. And so yeah, I relate to that. It was a really scary experience, and it got to the point for me where I was so unwell, like I was so unable to do anything, that my family was so worried. And this was quite a while after, but they ended up like trying to get private opinions, of maybe something else is wrong. Like, what can you try and help us? Because it was so scary just not knowing. And it's just like you need to have an answer, so you can know what to do to get out of it. But ultimately, you are by yourself, until I guess you find other people who've experienced it. But at first, that can be hard because you're not living in that healing world, are you, that you eventually find your way into?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, particularly early on in that, because it was locked down and, all of that stuff that went with it, I think the isolation was possibly more acute at that point. And, for
Yeah.
me, I remember I didn't want to join a support group because I thought that would be depressing. And I just didn't want to hear about other people's experience because my own was bad enough. And
Hmm.
eventually I did, actually, because I thought, I don't know what else to do. So I did actually find a support group, and it was incredibly depressing. And everyone was as sick or worse than I was. And it was awful.
Mm.
But I think initially what it did give me was some kind of feeling of, okay, this isn't just me. There are other people out
Hmm.
there, and that is awful, but it's not just me. And I think that did help on some level. But what I also discovered a while later was that, okay, community is important, but also the narratives that we are taking in is also important. But it was a very, yeah, very strange time. And I guess, I don't know, how,
Mm.
as time sort of goes on, did you find that you did start to connect with others or hear of others that were similar and, that would actually believe you? Because that's a terrible thing when someone sort of says, I don't really believe what you're saying. Like that must be a terrible thing to be told.
It is, especially when you're just so unwell and you've been so well. It's always like you feel like you're trying to explain yourself, isn't it? Like, this isn't how it was before, so please tell me why I feel the way that I do. But yeah, again, similar experience in that I initially found like an online, I guess, world of people experiencing a similar thing, but there was a lot of I guess, talk around being unable to get better. Like, we might have to accept that this is how it is forever. And I'm very, respectful of all of our journeys, and we're all on a different point. and I totally respect that. But there was just something in me that found it really hard to accept that. Like I could not allow myself to entertain the idea that I would never get better. And so I just kept searching and searching until I eventually found just like one or two people who would say, you know, there are people out there who have healed from this, like me, and you have to find those people and believe that that can be you too. And I think that's the moment that I felt a bit of hope, because I just thought if they can do it, and it's even if it's only one person that I've found so far, then there's hope that that can be me as well. And I think you're right, the narrative that we tell ourselves, or also like that we surround ourselves with, can be really important for that. Even though times are really hard, just that like little bit of belief that you hold on to, that you know that could be you if it can be someone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And, and I always say to people, it's what we feed ourselves. And that
Mm-hmm.
is the food that we put into our bodies, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, and also the social media or whatever it is that we kind of consume, whether it's online or, you know, that sort of content, and it all impacts us. So I think, it is important along with other things as well, of
Of
course.
course.
Um, but yeah, I totally relate to what you say because, I was feeling totally hopeless. I was getting worse, and everything that I read was terrible. There was a lot of narrative certainly early on around, death toll. That was all
Mm-hmm.
the news was talking about at the time. And, that really didn't help because there were times where I sort of felt like that's where I was headed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you start seeing just little glimmers. There was someone who would say, "You feel a little bit better today,"
Mm.
or, "I tried this thing and I think it's helped a bit." And then there was the first person that I saw who said, "I've recovered." And like initially, I was like, "Yeah, right." Um,
Mm.
but I did read her story and I thought, okay, that sort of starts to make sense. But she's really special, you know, she's
Mm-hmm.
really special. And and then I contacted her and I said, "Would you like to be on my podcast?"
Mm-hmm.
And spoke to her and connected. And we were just chatting before we hit record about how important connection was and how wonderful it was for us to sit and connect today. And I kind of
Yeah.
felt that a little bit with her, where it was like, you understand my experience because you've been through it, but you've recovered. What's so special about you?
Mm-hmm.
And, I sort of thought, well, maybe there's nothing special about her, obviously there's something special about everybody, but, if she did it, so can I.
Yeah.
And it was a huge turning point, I think, for me because it gave me that hope and belief that I didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, it wasn't easy from that point onwards. It was still up and down, and there were terrible moments and there were better moments, the
Mm.
up and down journey that we all experience. But yeah, I agree. Like that kind of moment of that person. Okay, there's one kind of thing. It was
Yeah.
absolutely huge. Um, so it sounds like that was a big moment for you, the kind of like, okay, someone's recovered. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what else did you start to find that helped, or didn't help?
Yeah. So I guess there's kind of two parts to that journey, because I had a lot of positive test results for things like Lyme disease and mold, um, and other viruses and things like that. So I went down a lot of different paths trying to treat these things, thinking that maybe that's what would help me get better. And so when I found people um, who I say like they healed and it gave me hope, I guess that was more in the like long COVID ME/CFS world, because I knew that I had that, like I had the um, post-exertional malaise and all of that, so I knew that that's something. But all these other things, I just kept thinking maybe it will get better if I treat them. So I did so many different like herbs and things like that, lots of different alternative medicine approaches. and they would make me very, like, I was so unwell that I would say they kind of took me from being like very severe to less severe, but I was still really unwell, like unable, like still bedbound basically. So I think um, they helped in a way, but I guess after a certain amount of time, I started to think to myself, what is it that means that I get these things and not everyone does? Why did this happen to me when I got COVID? Why? So I believe that I had them, because I lived in a house with mold, and it's like, why did my husband not get sick, but I did, and why did if I have Lyme disease, there must be people walking around with that who are okay. Like I've met people who say that they had a positive test, but so I guess that's why I started to wonder, like, why is it that I can't recover? And I guess that's when I found the nervous system world and idea that maybe I was stuck in this survival mode and my body wasn't able to heal from things in the way that other people could. And I think when I first heard that idea, I was very skeptical because I just thought, it can't be that, like, does that mean that I'm imagining it? Because I think there's that idea, isn't there, that means that it might not be quote unquote real in your body. But when I originally heard it, I was skeptical. But when I sort of started to see people who'd recovered and they explained how their life was before, how they'd always felt like their body was quite sensitive and they reacted to things, but they'd healed out of this survival mode and their body could get back into balance and heal. I think that's when I first truly got hope that actually this could be me. Like, I related to everything they said from before I got COVID, through my journey. It all just started to make not perfect sense, but a bit of sense to me. And when I found people in that kind of world, I guess, who had healed, I think that's when I started to really get hope, because I thought, I've tried all these treatments and nothing's helping. I've tried the antivirals to make sure I don't have COVID and all of that, but I was just like, something's missing.
And I think, it's a really good point that you make. I think sometimes people interpret nervous system, or I think the word mind body has certain
Mm-hmm.
connotations that can be misunderstood. You know, that kind of idea that it is all in your head and that you're imagining it, or that you're keeping yourself there deliberately, or that it's your fault that you're sick. And like, none of these things are true. But I think, again, because we are stuck in that kind of survival mode, makes us more defensive, which seems very, very cruel, doesn't it? That the one thing that could really, really help is the one thing that makes us feel incredibly defensive, and then, it makes it harder to access. But I think when we start to understand that it's not all in your head, it's not something that you've done to yourself deliberately, it's not your fault, none of these things actually are true, and start to kind of, as you said, put it into the context of your experience,
Mm-hmm.
it does start to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? You can relate to other people's stories and their experiences and the things that you have experienced, through your life and what led to it. And I mean, that's why I always start off every interview with, what was life like before you get sick? Because,
Mm-hmm.
it is related. So it is incredibly, it's just a whole world, isn't it? And again, that I had never understood, never even heard of until, well, I was kind of forced into it.
Yeah.
So I love that you kind of, had that skepticism, but were open to kind of exploring it a little bit, which then opened your eyes. So what happened next? You're kind of like, this makes sense, but
Yeah. And I just kept seeing more and more people who recovered. I think at first it was brain retraining that I heard of. And I think you're right. It's when you hear the word brain or mind, you start to think, oh, what does that mean? Like, does that mean it's not my body? But I quickly realized when I was hearing all these people that there was something in it. Like, so many people seem to be recovering from these programs. So I was still very unwell. It was really hard. I couldn't like watch videos or anything, so I wasn't able to do full programs, but started to pick up bits here and there, and I started to do visualizations as well. And when I started that, after I would say maybe 6 weeks, I felt a slight shift in something. I can't really explain it. It wasn't certainly wasn't miraculous, but I just felt like something was slightly different. Maybe a bit, maybe it was even just a bit more hopeful, I guess, at first. But I kind of felt like I was onto something. And so I I guess I found it hard to expand because I was bedbound. It was really hard for me to, even though I'd felt like a little bit of a shift, to understand how I was going to do this without the crashes coming. So I was sort of on board, but not fully understanding how this was going to help me. But yeah, so long story short, what happened is I found a coach just completely by chance. I don't even know to this day how I got so lucky to find her. But she had trained in mycal therapy, but she also did a lot of work with somatic therapy as well. So she was very much focused on the body. And when I met her, she taught me basically how to connect with my body, how to make my body feel safe through different somatic exercises, and how to reconnect with what it truly needed. And this idea that my body had this language almost that it was speaking to me, and if I could just learn to listen, I would be able to expand in a way that was obviously very slow and with pacing and within my window of tolerance, but it would mean that I was listening to my body and my body would respond positively to that. So it just sounded like such a wild idea, but I just thought I'm gonna go for it. And that's really when everything just started to be initially like rapidly change for me. I That's the only way I can describe it, and I know that doesn't happen to everyone, and that's totally okay. I'm not saying it was simple or easy, but I've been bedbound for so long and I was having these real dramatic shifts in what I was able to do and expand into, and I think that's just when I knew that this was it and I'd really hit on something, and that I was going to keep going with it, even though it was so hard and I knew it was going to take a long time. That was definitely the moment that I knew that this is what had happened to me, and this is what I needed to heal.
Yeah, and I love that because, I definitely remember feeling a sort of sense of, I'd found some things that helped and I was heading in the right direction. So it was just like, oh my goodness, thank goodness, this is amazing. I'm so pleased that things seem to be heading in the right direction. But there
Yeah.
was also this kind of sense of total overwhelm because now I was actually starting to face in the right direction. I had this sense of how far there was to go. And it was almost like, you know, it's like when you can see the cafe and it's like just an impossible distance away and you're so hungry. Uh, and I definitely found that was actually a really uncomfortable moment for me because it was the kind of like now I've got to keep going,
Hmm.
which was kind of scary on some level, but it was also, I also then felt really guilty for feeling that because it was like, well, I found the right thing, so this is really great. So it was very conflicted, I found,
Hmm.
with that. Um, but you're so on it with like, what does my body need? And I think most people in the world actually probably don't really know the answer to that question a lot of the time. And certainly it was never anything that I had ever considered in my entire life. And like learning to kind of, as you say, listen to your body and actually work out what does it need, and then how can I give it that was like a whole, well, as you said, a whole new language. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because you get it wrong quite a lot as well to start with.
Absolutely. I mean, and I really felt like she was speaking a different language. And she was, because she was speaking the language of the body, right? And for so long, I've been speaking the language of my mind. And I guess what I was beginning to understand was that my nervous system wanted to me to connect with it through the language of my body. And at first I couldn't understand why it was helping. I felt almost a bit like magical. I was like, why is it helping me that I'm doing this? But obviously, it all comes back to that you're tending to your body's needs, that you're giving it what it is asking for. And of course, that's helping our nervous system to heal and regulate as well. But yeah, it's not an easy journey. And I think we spoke about this before the call a little bit. It's the idea that when you look back and a certain amount of time has passed, you almost forget just how hard it was, because now you're so used to it and it becomes a way of life to connect with your body, when you've practiced for so long. But when I first started it, it was like learning a new language. And of course, we have to do that with an element of safety as well, so that our nervous system feels safe as we're doing this work, and we feel safe enough to start to reconnect with our body or with our emotions. So yeah, it's a journey that I think, if you're not able to do that easily, which most of us aren't, it's really important to have someone there who can support you to do it in a way that feels safe, and also someone, I guess, who can guide you through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, it's coming back to that idea of connection, isn't it? Someone who you're able to connect with, someone who understands, someone you don't have to explain yourself to, but someone who can be your cheerleader, but also who can kind of give you the hard truths when you need them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, I agree. It is really important to have someone like that. And I think, I did not realize how big a role my therapist played in my recovery until afterwards, because she was all of those things for me. And,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people find working with a coach or coaching programs or recovery programs, or, there's so many things out there. And it's kind of, you've got to find the thing that works for you, haven't you, I think? And it sounds like this person that you met with the mycotherapy and the other stuff that you said you were doing had that
Mm-hmm.
kind of impact for you, which is amazing. So you said that you had started doing all of this stuff and you were moving slowly, but you really were
Mm-hmm.
starting to see kind of a lot of improvements. Were there other things that helped, or was it just continuing to do these things sort of consistently over time?
That's a great question. I think the other thing that I haven't mentioned that really helped me was EFT, so like emotional freedom technique tapping, because that really helped me to process, I guess, a lot of the limiting beliefs that I had around being able to do it, being able to recover and expand. So that was another huge part of the journey for me. But once I carried on with the brain retraining and the visualization as well. But once I found all of the somatic work, it was mostly, I would say, a case of continuing with that a lot of the day, really. Every day it was hard work. I can't pretend that it was easy, but the progress that I was making was keeping me going, because it was also felt amazing, if that makes sense, at the same time. So it was really a combination of different nervous system things, but it was just a slow and steady journey after that, in over the next few months, to, I guess, be able to expand my nervous system, to hold more and more, and to expand more and more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean I think that is so key. It's finding the right things. And that's different for everybody. Not everyone loves yoga nidra. Cold water doesn't help everyone. Some people don't like acupuncture. There's so many different things out there. But it's finding what works for you as an individual. And then, as you say, doing it consistently. It's that consistent practice, isn't it, over time, where those little tiny shifts add up and up and up and up and up over time. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, I'm an overcommitter. I did the thing where I was like, right, I need more things because they're going to make me more better. So I,
Mm-hmm.
started trying to do too many different good practices, and like they were all good things, but there were too many of them, and I was, overdoing the good stuff. So it was
Yeah.
kind of taking that step back and saying, okay, what are the things that help me the most? And then kind of making them a priority and having other stuff that I maybe pulled in when I needed it, kind of thing. And I think again, this is a lot of people do this, but it's sometimes less is more, isn't it? I think. We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
That's so true. Yeah. And I think adding a lot of self-compassion as well, that's something else that my coach really taught me, is to just be kind to yourself along the way and believe that, you're looking back, you're seeing this progress, believe in yourself. And I am a recovering perfectionist, so that's really hard to do at times, isn't it? And I'm also have been so guilty of adding in other things along the way, but there are also many things that through this process of meeting my needs that I actually took out because I realized they weren't really serving me, but I'd been doing them for so long because I thought I must do them to heal. So yeah, it's not easy. It's a process of figuring out what works and being kind to yourself through all of that. But I think when you find something that does and it feels right, then it does become more about that consistency.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there about how things do change over
Mm-hmm.
time. It might be that to start with, you find a thing that's really great for you, but then as your nervous system and your body changes and your needs change, that actually maybe it's a case of letting go of something that you used before, and maybe there are other things that you can then start to bring in. And I guess, we've talked about understanding our bodies and listening to them and meeting our needs. And the better we get at that, the easier it is to kind of know what it is. Do I need that thing or that thing right now? And actually, okay, maybe it's time to let go of some of that and bring in a bit of something else. And I think certainly for me now, it's something that I do much more intuitively. And it's feeling rather than thinking, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Rather than thinking what should I need, it's like, well, let's actually listen to my body and what do I
Yeah,
need, kind of thing.
absolutely.
So what did that kind of final sort of move towards that I'm fully recovered look like? Was you a slow burn or a kind of dramatic? What did that kind of look like for you? And how did you know that you were better?
That's really interesting because it happened so fast at the beginning, and because of how unwell I'd been, it felt like I was healed probably long before I actually was. Because after a few months of doing all of this work, I was, downstairs going into the garden, all of these things that they had felt like the ultimate dream for me. So it felt like in many ways I've reached my goal because I've made, I'm where I wanted to be. Um, and so that all happened, I would say, relatively fast, from being very severe to somewhat being able to live and go for these walks in nature and see my friends again and all of that. But looking back now from where I am, I think there was also a lot of trauma from the illness as well that I needed to come to and meet once I had come to that level where I considered myself somewhat healed. And so there was some healing left to do, I guess. But at first, I didn't really realize that, I felt like I had everything that I wanted. So I think that even in the last year, I have felt like there's still things that happen where I think, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know that I needed that, but now I'm definitely healed. So it does feel like a bit of I'm constantly shifting the goalpost, if that makes sense. At first I felt like I was healed, but actually I was still putting limitations on myself. Like, I'm healed, but I'll always need to work for myself, and I'll always need to do this just to make sure it doesn't happen again. But things that have happened this year, like I started more as an experiment, working for someone else out of the house. And I was able to do that. And I told myself for so long that I would never do that again, that kind of thing. And I also got married a couple of months ago, and I planned the wedding, and I danced for 5 hours, like I was on my feet for 12 hours. And I think it's those kind of moments where you're just like, okay, now I feel like I'm healed, if that makes sense. Because although it felt like it quite a while ago, I was still putting those limitations on myself without realizing.
That's really interesting because, like, I can relate to some of that as well. There are times where, I mean, I think it was almost like I recovered from long COVID, well, about 2.5 years ago now for me, but I hadn't recovered from life. There
Yeah,
were still other things that, yes, I was completely recovered from long COVID and that wasn't holding me back at all. But, there was still stuff from my childhood that I needed to work through. There was still, I still had some anxiety that I had been covering up forever, that I needed to work through. And I think it was almost like for me, once my eyes had been opened to sort of wanting to be as well as I could possibly be, it was that, as you said, the goalposts kept shifting. And every
mm-hmm.
time I felt a release from something, then there was another thing and another thing and another thing. And the perfectionist in me couldn't handle this to start with. Until my therapist said something like, there's always going to be something. Everyone's always, if you're not healing from something, it's because you're trying to pretend that you're not, kind of thing. It's because you're not aware of it yet. And, that kind of allowed me to let go of some of that kind of I suppose, yeah, need to be perfect and to be like, yeah, okay, there's always going to be stuff, and that's fine because that's part of being human. And it sort of felt quite liberating almost in some
I
ways
love
to be
that.
able to let go of that and say, yeah, that there's always going to be things to come up and that's fine. Um,
I love that. So true. Because just when you were saying that, I was just kind of made me realize that actually I often realize that I'm healed in the hard times, because we're going to have hard times and they're always going to come up. But now the way we're able to handle that, or the way we're able to connect with ourselves and what we need in those times, that is such a sign of healing. Because healing doesn't mean life's perfect, does it? It just means that we know ourselves more and how to meet ourselves where we're at.
yeah, I think you're right because again, I had this kind of idea that when I was recovered, that life would be perfect. It would be
Yeah,
sunshine and roses and everything would be amazing all the time. And, life is great. It's greater than it has ever been, I think. But that doesn't mean that like stuff doesn't happen, because it happens to everybody. And, that's just, well, it's part of an unfortunate part of being human, isn't it? That, stressors do come, bad things do happen. But I think it's part of being more resilient is that you can handle them when they come. It doesn't mean you can enjoy them, but you
yeah,
can handle those kind of tougher times, and then you also enjoy the good times more. I think as well, and I still find myself being absurdly grateful for like pretty small things, what most people would call inconsequential stuff. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, the sun's shining, and I'll get so excited about that. I live in Scotland, so it doesn't happen too often. But it's that kind of, I don't know. I think certainly for me, it's given me a different perspective on life and what's important.
that's so true. I remember when I first went outside, after being inside for so long, and I just couldn't understand how I'd never seen trees look like that before. And I
Yeah.
don't think you ever really lose that gratitude and appreciation for those tiny things. And like you said, in so many ways, it'll always be life. But when we do come on this connection with ourselves and we do know what we need and what we want, and I guess a lot of people come to maybe a different life than what they had before all this, and it is something that it feels just more beautiful. You appreciate it more, but also it's just more you know, I guess you connect more to what really matters.
Yeah, I agree. And it sounds like your life is very different. I think that was one of the things that you started with was, my life is very different to what it was before. So what does life look like from you now?
Yeah, so I live in the countryside now, which is I guess, such a huge change for me. I didn't know that I didn't even know that that's what I wanted. And now it's just so wonderful. I spend so much of my time in nature, and I am working for myself, and I have another, job in my community, which is lovely. And I'm just so much more connected to things that I wasn't before. I guess like things that light me up. Before I kept busy, but I'm not sure there were things I really wanted to do. But now, this connection, I guess, to your body, it's not just about healing symptoms, it's also about what is it that makes you happy and brings you joy. So, my life's very different in the way that I do a lot of things, like I'm in a choir, or I'll paint, or whatever that may be, that just bring my life meaning. And it's also different because I just feel more connected to myself and the people around me. And there's that appreciation that I didn't have before. And I could go on and on, but it's different in so many ways.
Yeah, and it sounds amazing. It sounds like you've had a big year as well.
Yeah, it's been a very big year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's I think we talked about this at the beginning, it's can be such a difficult journey, and I don't, ever want to speak in the way that it's not, but it can also bring you closer to the life that I think you're meant to live, and that can be a positive thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. So, I guess finally, what advice would you give yourself for when you were still unwell, or what would you have wanted to know?
I think I'd want to know that my body is always working for me and not against me. It felt so much like I was mad at my body because it wasn't doing what I wanted it to. But ultimately, it was always trying to heal me. It was always trying to tell me what it needed. And it was my greatest guide. And I didn't know how to listen, and that's not my fault. We're not really taught how. But I think I'd want to know that it was my body and the connection with that would ultimately lead me where I wanted to go, but also that I was allowed to be kind to myself along the way, and that being compassionate with myself and validating how hard it can be, but also just being there for myself through it. Yeah, I think both of those things like really, really would have been helpful to know at the start.
Yeah. And that's why I always finish with this question because, people listening, may still be on this journey and, you know, that might be exactly what they needed to hear right now. So I think it's beautiful that we can pass that on. So
Yeah.
Ashley, thank you so much. It's been amazing chatting with you. It's been lovely hearing your story, and thank you so much for sharing it with everybody and for putting yourself through it, reliving it for us all. If anyone wants to connect with you, I will make sure that I put all your links in the show notes, so you know where to go. So thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's been so great.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.